Have you ever sat by the phone, waiting for a call that never came? Or maybe you've stared at old photos, wondering how something so beautiful could drift into silence? If you've ever felt the sting of being pushed away by your own child, the very person you gave your heart, your years, your sacrifices to, then you're not alone. And if that pain has left you wondering what went wrong, or why the love you gave hasn't come back the way you hoped, I want you to take a deep breath with me. Because you are seen, you are heard, and yes, you are still deeply worthy of love and peace. Today, we're going to explore something that might surprise you. It's an idea drawn from deep, time-tested wisdom, but it's more relevant now than ever, that being rejected by your child, while heartbreaking, can actually become a powerful blessing in disguise. It might not feel that way right now. I know how heavy it can be. But with honest reflection and a calm, steady heart, we're going to uncover how this pain can become a teacher, a guide, and even a path to rediscovering yourself. Let's talk about what happens when someone you love deeply no longer returns that love in the way they once did, or maybe never did. For mothers especially, that love runs deeper than words. You remember the scraped knees, the school plays, the way you stayed up late helping with homework or calming them through nightmares. You did everything you could to build them up. So when they grow distant, when your calls go unanswered, or your voice is met with coldness, it doesn't just hurt, it shakes the ground beneath you. But what if I told you that this pain, as unbearable as it feels, could also be the beginning of something healing? I once met a woman named Mary. She was the kind of mother every child would be lucky to have. She raised her son David with unconditional love. She worked double shifts, gave up vacations, and always made sure he felt supported. But as the years passed and David built his own life, something changed. The warmth in his voice faded. The visits stopped. Mary found herself calling more than she should, leaving voicemails that went unanswered. At first, she was confused, then hurt, then angry, and finally, numb. One day she said to me, "I did everything I could. I don't understand what I did wrong." Her voice cracked with the kind of ache you don't just hear, you feel. But what she said next stayed with me. Maybe the pain isn't only about what he did, but what I expected in return. That realization was the turning point. You see, when we love with all our hearts, it's natural to hope that love comes back. But there's a deeper truth we often overlook. The root of our suffering often isn't the event itself, but our expectations around it. It's not what happens to us that truly disturbs us, but how we choose to see it. That's a powerful truth. Your child has their own life, their own struggles, their own wounds you may never fully see. Their distance might feel personal, but often it's not about you at all. Maybe they're overwhelmed, emotionally unavailable, or carrying pain they've never spoken aloud. But none of that erases your worth. And here's the most important part: their rejection does not define you. If you let your sense of peace rest in their hands, you'll always be waiting for them to give it back to you. But you don't have to wait. You can take it back, right now. Because the freedom you deserve, the peace, the love, the dignity, it's not locked inside your child. It's already inside you. Mary began to see that. Instead of reaching outward for answers, she started looking inward. She stopped asking why David didn't call and began asking what parts of herself had been forgotten in all the giving. She took walks in the early morning light. She joined a local quilting group and rediscovered her creative spark. She read, reflected, and slowly rebuilt her days. Not around the silence she couldn't change, but the joy she could choose to create. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. But it was possible. And that's the power of letting go. Not letting go of love, but of the illusion that we can control the hearts of others. Because we can't. But what we can do is change how we carry the love within us. This kind of wisdom speaks to us again and again. Someone once wrote, "Love whatever happens to you, for it is what was meant for you." At first glance, that can sound cold, even cruel. But read it again with an open heart. It's not about denying the pain. It's about accepting that life isn't about fairness. It's about growth. And sometimes the things that hurt us most are the very things that shape us into who we were always meant to become. There's another truth we need to sit with, and it's not always easy. When we're hurt, our ego wants to step in and take the wheel. It tells us we were right, that we were the perfect parent, that we deserve more. And maybe all of that is true, but ego doesn't heal us. It keeps us stuck. It traps us in a loop of blame and resentment, which only deepens the wound. Imagine for a moment if you could drop the weight of needing to be right. What if, instead of focusing on how unfair the rejection feels, you opened a door to curiosity instead of judgment? What if you asked, not with blame, but with compassion? What might my child be going through that they've never said out loud? You may never get the answer, but the question itself softens something inside. It brings peace. I remember another woman, Margaret. She was proud, strong, and deeply loving. But she also carried a sharpness in her tone, a habit of speaking for your own good, as she put it. Her daughter, over time, felt unseen. When the distance grew, Margaret's first reaction was anger. "She owes me more than this," she'd say. But one day, during a quiet afternoon at a coffee shop, her daughter told her the truth. "You never listened. You always thought you knew what I needed, but you never asked what I felt." That moment crushed Margaret, but it also opened her eyes. She didn't agree with everything her daughter said, but she did something brave. She listened, without defense, without ego. And that listening started to build something new between them. Not perfectly, not overnight, but honestly. Sometimes being willing to look at our role, even when we meant well, is the first step toward transformation. So, if you're carrying pain right now, I want you to know, it's okay to feel it. It's okay to grieve what you hoped for. But you don't have to live in that space forever. You can choose today to begin seeing this not as a punishment, but as a powerful invitation to reflect, to grow, and to love in a new way. A way that doesn't depend on how others respond, but on the strength of who you are. You are not broken. You are not unloved. You are a woman who has given her heart, and now has the opportunity to give it to herself, maybe for the first time in years. Let's keep walking this path together. There's something remarkably powerful that happens when you stop holding your breath for someone else's affection and start breathing life back into your own spirit. That shift, gentle at first, can become a quiet revolution in your soul. It's not about forgetting your child or pretending the pain isn't there. It's about no longer letting that pain decide how you wake up each morning or how you carry yourself through the day. Now, let's talk about the kind of love that isn't easy, but might just be the most liberating kind you'll ever give. Unconditional love. We hear that phrase so often that it almost loses meaning. But when it's tested, really tested, that's when you learn what kind of love you truly carry inside. Unconditional love doesn't mean tolerating mistreatment. It doesn't mean letting someone walk all over you or dismiss your worth. What it means is that you can love someone without making your peace dependent on their behavior. That's a very different thing. It's a kind of love that says, "I care about you, but I won't let your distance define me. I honor you, but I also honor myself." A mother named Linda once shared something so simple, yet so profound. She said, "I realized I was still loving my son, but in a way that didn't ask him to prove anything anymore. I didn't stop missing him, but I stopped waiting." Her voice was soft, but her spirit was strong. That's the power of choosing love without expectation. It allows you to keep your heart open without leaving yourself vulnerable to constant disappointment. And here's the beautiful part. When you begin to love that way, you also start to heal. You stop fighting the current and begin floating on your own strength. You become like a river, not because the path is always smooth, but because you keep flowing. You find new ways to pour that love into your life, your community, your creativity, your faith. But to do that, you must let go of something that can sneak in quietly and wrap itself around your heart before you even realize it. Pride. Oh, pride is tricky. It wears many disguises. It can sound like self-respect, but deep down it's often fear. Fear of being wrong, of not being enough, of being seen as weak. Pride can keep you frozen in place, clinging to the belief that if your child doesn't return your love, then something must be broken, or they must be punished by your silence. But let me offer you this truth, gently. Pride is not the same as dignity. Dignity allows you to stand tall and love freely without needing to win or prove anything. Pride keeps you locked in a battle that no one's winning. I remember Thomas, a father who hadn't spoken to his daughter in over a decade. He used to say, "She owes me the first move. I was the parent. I did everything I could." But one day, he admitted, "I never told her I was proud of her. I thought she knew. I never asked how she really felt. I assumed." That admission didn't fix everything, but it was the first time Thomas let go of needing to be right. And in that space, a kind of peace crept in. That's the thing about ego. It's loud. It demands. It defends. But peace is quiet. It listens. It breathes. It lets you step out of the old story you've been telling yourself, the one where you're the victim of someone else's choices, and into a new one, where you're the author of your own healing. Now let's speak honestly about something that weighs heavily on so many women I talk to: judgment. Not just the judgment of others, but the harsh whispers that echo in your own mind. Maybe you've heard them. What did I do to deserve this? People must think I failed. If I had been a better mother, this wouldn't have happened. Stop. Breathe. You are not a failure. You are not broken. You are not alone. The judgment you feel, especially from others who may not know a thing about your story, does not define you. The stares, the comments, even the well-meaning advice, they don't live your life. They don't carry your memories. And they certainly don't get to write your truth. There's a quiet strength in learning to stay calm in the face of judgment, to understand that other people's opinions are outside our control. As someone wisely said, do not let the opinions of others become your own thoughts. That's not just a nice saying, it's practical survival. Because when you internalize someone else's story about you, you abandon your own. Instead of shrinking under the weight of criticism, imagine standing firm like a tree. A tree doesn't panic when the wind blows. It doesn't beg the storm to be gentle. It just stands, rooted, steady, alive. I want you to picture yourself that way, especially when those voices of doubt, whether from the outside or your own heart, try to pull you down. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your journey. Not your neighbors, not your distant relatives, not even your younger self who dreamed of a different ending. What you owe is kindness to yourself and the courage to keep growing. And maybe the hardest part of all, harder than the silence, the judgment, or the unmet expectations, is the resentment that builds when love has nowhere to go. It simmers slowly. It's subtle at first. You replay old conversations. You remember words that hurt. You think of what could have been, and that hurt becomes heavy. But resentment, as comforting as it may feel in moments of anger, is a poison we drink, hoping someone else will feel the pain. And it never works. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's not about excusing what's happened. It's about deciding that you will no longer let someone else's choices control your peace. You deserve more than to carry the weight of bitterness. You deserve to walk light, to rest easy, to laugh without guilt. That kind of freedom begins with a decision, one that might not happen all at once. Maybe today you simply admit, I don't want to feel this anger anymore. That's enough. That's a beginning. Then maybe tomorrow you say, I forgive them, Not because they apologized, but because I need to breathe again. And eventually, that space where resentment used to live fills with something better. Calm, clarity, and yes, hope. Because your story isn't over. You still have pages to write, memories to create, and joy to feel. And whether or not your child chooses to walk that path with you, you still have the right and the power to walk it well. Let's take another step forward, together. There's something incredibly beautiful about the moment you realize that love, real, deep, soul-rooted love, doesn't have to stay stuck in one direction. Just because your child has closed a door doesn't mean your love has nowhere to go. It means you get to choose where to send it next. A woman named Margaret found herself standing at that exact crossroads. After years of pouring her heart into a son who barely returned a phone call, she woke up one morning with a thought that changed everything. What if I stopped begging for love and started sharing it where it could bloom? That day, she drove to the local animal shelter. She didn't know why, not exactly. But when she held a trembling rescue puppy in her lap, she felt her heart soften. Not break, soften. It wasn't her son's love, but it was still love. And it mattered. That's what happens when we choose to redirect our love. Instead of letting it rot in resentment or grief, we plant it in new places. Places where it can grow, into kindness, creativity, friendship, community. Because love doesn't disappear just because one person refuses to receive it. It's still in you, ready to be transformed. You might be wondering where to start. The answer isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as baking muffins for a neighbor you barely know, or offering to read to a child at the library. Maybe you take out the sketchbook you haven't touched in 30 years. Or you finally take that writing class you kept putting off. Whatever lights even the smallest spark in your spirit, that's the place to begin. And here's the secret. When you pour your love into something meaningful, something bigger than the pain, that energy comes back to you in ways you never expected. Sometimes it comes as peace. Sometimes as new connections. Sometimes it simply feels like waking up and realizing you matter. Not because of who does or doesn't call you, but because you still have something to give. And giving is living. It's easy to think that your purpose ended when the house got quiet or when your child turned away. But let me remind you, your purpose was never just to raise someone else. That was a chapter, a sacred one, yes, but not the whole story. This is your time to ask yourself, what else do I want to become? What dreams did I set aside to be someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's everything? Because now, in this stage of life, you have something you may not have had before: space. Space to explore, to rediscover, to honor your own name. Maybe you used to love painting, but there was never time. Maybe you wanted to learn French, grow a garden, or take that trip you always postponed. Or maybe you just want to slow down and actually enjoy your mornings, your coffee, your books, your breath. That is purpose too. Someone once said, "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." If your thoughts keep telling you that you've been abandoned, that you've lost your worth, that your story is over, pause. Breathe. Choose different thoughts. Not fantasies, but truths. You are still here. You are still becoming. You are still worthy of joy, of love, of purpose. The role of mother may have changed, but the role of woman, of soul, of light bringer, that remains. And if there's still a wound in your heart that aches for reconciliation, know this. Healing doesn't always come wrapped in the moment you imagined. Your child may never apologize. They may never see your pain or even come back. But you can still live well. You can still wake up and smile. You can still give the love they rejected to someone or something that needs it more. That is not a loss. That is a redirection. And it is sacred. Think of a tree that's lost a branch. The wound is visible, sure, but the tree keeps growing. Its roots deepen. Its canopy stretches. And when spring returns, New leaves come, not where the old branch was, but where the sun still touches. You too are allowed to keep growing, to reach for the light, to find your own spring. So if today you're holding on to sadness, take my hand, just for a moment. Let's turn it over gently and look at what's underneath. Maybe it's not just sorrow. Maybe it's love with nowhere to go. Maybe it's hope, quiet but alive. Maybe it's purpose, waiting patiently for you to notice it again. Because rejection, while painful, doesn't get to be the final word. What matters more is what you do next. Do you let it define you, or do you let it refine you? You've come this far. You've weathered storms, heartbreak, years of sacrifice and service. And now, you're being invited, not punished. Invited to choose yourself again. To find the kind of joy that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. To build a life that still feels rich, even if one chapter ended differently than you dreamed. You can do this. You are doing this. Every step you've taken to keep going, every moment you've chosen peace over pride, every tear you've turned into prayer, that's strength. That's wisdom. That's legacy. So if you're still with me, if this message has stirred something in your heart, I want to thank you. Not just for watching, but for being here. For choosing, even in your pain, to reflect, to heal, to grow. If this video brought you clarity, please share it with someone else who might need it. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with the words, "I choose my peace," so I know you're walking this path with me. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. I've got more reflections, stories, and soul-deep encouragement coming your way. And until then, remember this. You are not what was taken from you. You are not the silence on the other end of the phone. You are not forgotten. You are growing. You are rising. And you are, still and always, deeply, unshakably loved. Here's to living your best life at any age.